So a pleasant day to everyone, and we are the group 5 and we are assigned to discuss about diversity. And our topics is divided into two subtopics, namely the factors affecting diversity and the relationship between production and diversity. So just sit back, relax, and listen as we discuss to you all about these things. Before we tackle what are the factors affecting diversity, let me share to you what is diversity first. So diversity in general refers to the different forms, types, or ideas, while species diversity is the measure of biological diversity observed in a particular ecological community, indicating a number of species or species richness in an ecological community. So how are these species affected, or what are the factors affecting diversity? Now we will discuss the first factor that affect biodiversity, which is the human-induced change. So natural habitats get lost in terms of area and replaced by urban and agricultural areas. At the same time, habitat can lose its ability to support species by changes in habitat structure. Example is the conversion of natural forest to planted monocultures, increased human appropriation of net primary production, which decreased the amount of available energy for rest of the food web and thus number of individuals. And lastly is contamination. So human-induced changes such as land use change, climate change, and pollution can have a significant impact on the diversity of a given ecosystem. These changes can lead to the extinction of certain species, the introduction of exotic species, and the alteration of habitat conditions. So there is an example flashed here in your screen right now. So this example decrease habitat area and affect species by species area relationships, or decrease the suitability of habitats for some species. So since there are trees being cut down or removed, this will affect many insects, herbivores for example, or any other species specialized on that tree, while the remaining habitats may be fragmented in small islands, which again may increase risk of local extinction as explained earlier. So this cutting down of trees or caused by either deforestation or illegal loggings has a direct effect on the species and their performance or relationship within the area where they can be found. So the other factor that affect diversity is climate. Climate is a major factor affecting diversity. The effects of climate change, such as increasing temperatures, can alter the distribution of species and lead to changes in the composition of an ecosystem. So climate change may cause weather patterns to be less predictable. These unexpected weather patterns can make it difficult to maintain and grow crops in regions that rely on farming because expected temperature and rainfall levels can no longer be relied on. So an example for climate is shown in your screen or flash in your screen. So global change affects species in many ways. It shifts climate, which may cause changes in distribution of habits. The effects on species performance can be, however, more complex. For example, climatic changes can alter phenology, which may cause mismatch between seasonal parent resources and species life cycles. Moreover, effects of these factors on biodiversity are not isolated but largely magnified by their joint influence. For example, species can respond to latitudinal climatic shifts can be followed by a shift in species range. This can be, however, hampered by loss or degradation of potentially suitable habitats in the new species range by human activity. Loss of biodiversity can in turn feed back in changes of ecosystem functioning, human health, and well-being.
Abiotic factors such as soil type, pH, and moisture can also influence diversity. Different species of plants and animals are adapted to different conditions and may be unable to survive in an environment that has been altered by human activity or climate change. An abiotic factor is a non-living part of an ecosystem that shapes its environment. In a terrestrial ecosystem, examples might include temperature, light, and water. In a marine ecosystem, abiotic factors would include salinity and ocean currents. Abiotic and biotic factors work together to create a unique ecosystem. Humans, like other animals, also require certain abiotic factors to survive and live comfortably. For starters, we need oxygen to breathe. Respiration powers our cells. We live on a planet that is shielded from the ultraviolet radiation of the sun. The cells in our bodies are susceptible to damage from ultraviolet. Ultraviolet light radiation can cause genetic damage and even trigger cancer. Earth's fake atmosphere acts as a shield against ultraviolet radiation. As ecosystems change over time, abiotic factors can also vary. For instance, the pH of water is changing in some parts of the ocean as carbon dioxide dissolves in the water, making it more acidic. Biotic factors. Biotic factors such as predation and competition can be a big influence on the diversity of an ecosystem. Predation can lead to the extinction of certain species, while competition can lead to the exclusion of certain species from certain areas. So, a biotic factor is a living organism that shapes its environment. In a freshwater ecosystem, examples might include aquatic plants, fish, amphibians, and algae. Biotic and abiotic factors work together to create a unique ecosystem. Biotic factors. It is known as the biotic components. It is the living components in an ecosystem. The term biotic means of or related to living organisms. An ecosystem consists of all living organisms and the sociochemical components. They are also referred to as the biotic factors and the biotic factors respectively. They interact and function together as a unit. The biotic factors includes the physical and chemical factors such as sunlight, water, temperature, and other non-living components of an ecosystem. Biotic factors are the living components such as bacteria, birds, and any other living things in an ecosystem. So a biotic is a factor created by a living thing or any living component with an environment with which the action of the organism. Biotic factors are factors resulting from the activities of a living thing or any living component in an environment, such as the actions of an organism affecting the life of other organisms. So for example, in a quail's environment, the biotic factors are the living elements of the environment, such as the quail's prey. For example, insects, seeds, and the quail's predators such as the coyotes.
Hi everyone. Today we're going to discussing an ecological issue called habitat fragmentation. So, what is habitat fragmentation? Habitat fragmentation, according to Dilham 2010, is the process by which habitat loss results in the division of large, continuous habitats into smaller, more isolated remnants. This process breaks up native habitats, making it harder for them to support native plant and animal species, and is often due to human intervention, and it affects species worldwide.
Fragmentation of habitats can lead to the isolation of certain species, which can lead to a decrease in diversity. Fragmentation can also lead to an increase in the number of exotic species in a given area, which can lead to a decrease in the diversity of native species.
So, there are three terrestrial reasons for habitat fragmentations include forest fragmentation, roads or highways, and fences.
Forest fragmentation is a result of deforestation. Humans cut down trees for resources, but this affects the surrounding environment, even if we're only cutting down some trees and leaving parts of the forest untouched. When we clear-cut areas of forest, we divide the forest habitat into smaller sections, which changes the dynamic of the ecosystem. For example, the caribou. There is a lot of forest fragmentation in the tundra, so caribou and deer are drawn to areas of younger forest for plant consumption, which are found at the edges of the forest that have recently been cut down and are now growing back. And having prey more accessible attracts predators, such as wolves, to the smaller hunting grounds with increased open space. This increased access to prey is beneficial for the wolves, but detrimental to the caribou, which is an at-risk species. Roads and highways have become a huge issue in several habitats. Humans build roads and major highways to improve travel and the transportation of goods from one place to another. However, this not only divides the habitat, but the now fast-driving, large vehicles prove to be a threat for any animal trying to cross the road. Turtle species have been horribly impacted as wetlands are often fragmented by roads. Turtles living in wetlands often try to cross the road to get back to their nesting sites and are often hit by cars while crossing due to their slow-moving nature and the speed at which the cars are driving. Our last source of fragmentation that we are going to discuss today are fences. If you're walking through your neighborhood or drive past a farm, you will probably find fences everywhere. Have you ever thought about how your backyard fence might impact the animals living in your area? Humans put up fences for a variety of reasons, such as property lines, keeping pests out, keeping pets inside designated yards, and sports fields. We may not think about it, but fences obstruct animals from passing through to the other side of their habitat. For example, in Australia, farmers have installed dingo fences to prevent the wild dog from eating their flocks of sheep. This strategy, however, creates a division through the middle of the habitat, which is home to many more species beyond the dingo. Fences along roads have caused huge populations of emus to reroute and find alternative ways to get back to the other side of their habitat. Habitat fragmentation is one of the many effects our actions have on the environment. Now that we are aware of these issues, construction plans and deforestation efforts should be considered much more thoroughly before any action takes place. We must think before acting and weigh all of the options, so that any alterations we make to the environment do not cause damage to those who live there.
So, good day everyone. My name is Suruji Oliti, and my topic is interaction among species. Interaction between species can have a big influence on the diversity of an ecosystem. Species can compete for resources or they can cooperate in order to increase their chance of survival. This interaction can lead to change in the composition of an ecosystem. So, example interaction among species. Species interaction describe the relationship among organisms of different species living in the same location. Example include herbivorous eating plants, carnivorous eating animals, and organism competing for food, species, or mates. So that's all. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. My name is Kamal Sisolis, and at this point, I will be discussing to you guys a part of the relationship between production and diversity. So, according to John Frost in 2013, he discussed the relationship between production and diversity. In his book, that we can, if you can see this now, it is on the book of Applied Ecology. He states that the two concepts are closely related and can influence one another. So, as we think about how these relationships occur between production and diversity, it could end with two ways. It could either be we can change the production through changing the productivity of the environment, and we can observe through this the effects or the reaction of the diversity. Another way, or the other way, is we can manipulate the number of species on this or with the same environmental conditions, and right after that, as we manipulate it, we can observe how production goes, no, with manipulated number of species. And from that, the result of those experiments or those ways concludes how productivity, neither diversity affects the production or vice versa. So he argues that diversity is an important factor in the production of an ecosystem, as it can increase the productivity of the system. So, additionally, he notes that production can also foster diversity, vice versa, as increased productivity can create suitable habitats and niches for a greater variety of species. Now, as we look on a global scale, the primary production of the terrestrial ecosystem is in its highest at in tropics, no, where greatest diversity is also existing, because in tropics, Mongod, the climate or the environmental conditions are very suitable for those species to exist, no. And as we look on the landscape level, mostly Mongod, um, they are fighting or they are competing mostly, or the top factor is the nutrients availability. This is where Frost um, talks more about it. So Frost further points out that production and diversity can also have a negative relationship. He states that when production is too high, it can lead to increased competition for resources, which can reduce the number of species present in an ecosystem. Similarly, too much diversity can also lead to competition for resources, as well as a decrease in overall production. So, for example, I have there at the very bottom of my topic, or right after this paragraph, you can see a picture having a or showing the production rate with also the diversity within it at the bottom part, where at the side part is shows the productivity rate. So as you have noticed, um, the higher the nutrient, it also depicts that the diversity within it is also high, but it doesn't last. Okay, it doesn't last because the greater the population on that certain area, the more competition occurs. So let's cite a specific example. So as what I have mentioned earlier, on a landscape level, the main factor that is mostly affecting the diversity or the species living on that ecosystem is more on the um, nutrients availability. So if you have noticed, if that land or if that certain area has low nutrients or lesser nutrient availability, therefore the chance of living species to exist on that place is also low. So we can conclude that the diversity within that area having lesser nutrients is also low or less lang ang diversity. Gamay ra ang mga species nga pwedeng mabuhi ana, di ba? Whereas if we put too much, or let's say the nutrients availability is constantly increasing, the more species will exist. So there we can conclude that species under increasing nutrient availability also increases its or the species diversity. Okay? So there we are. We have enough nutrient availability to sustain those kind of species. However, there is also a factor. It doesn't goes along really well because the more nga mo the more productive ang species with different diversity, syempre, there are the competition kicks in. So what will happen um as I since we are dealing with nutrients and plants can get nutrients um in their own ways. So let's deal first with the underground competition. So what will happen on the underground competition? Plants having a feature of like um, tall roots or longer roots that can go beneath the ground has more chances of surviving, no? Because imagine a lot of species are currently living on that certain area. So because of that, nutrients are limited na. So they tend to find ways in order for them to survive. What will happen to the plants that that or the plants that doesn't have the capability of having that feature to survive? Unsay may tabo? Of course, um they mostly of them died or became extinct na. And the species that will dominate are those species having the features that could survive, no, with such competition. So again, at first, with low nutrients, the diversity or species living in that area is also low. When we increase the nutrients availability, a lot of species will exist on that area. However, it will not last. Okay? Because as the plant um the population growth of that plant increases, the competition kicks in, fighting for resources or the nutrients. So this is what Frost is um, pointing to. There is a negative effects on it because when nutrients is limited, diversity is also decreasing. All right. So another thing here, if that is the case where population growth is limited na, since nutrient availability is also limited na pod, there we facilitate those plans. This is with the help of this kind of hypothesis, specifically the stress gradient hypothesis, which predicts the which doesn't only matter on one lang underground competition. They also consider factors like climates, temperatures, whatsoever that can affect those plants. What they did is people like people who are conducting the stress gradient hypothesis, they facilitate the cooperation with the various species in order for them to live without um, minding competitions. They're more on helping one another in order for those types of species to survive. That is a good solution of us people, knowing that there are things happening like competition. So what we did is facilitate them in um imbis nga ato na lang silang pasagdaan nga mag-competition with which results to extinction of some species, we facilitate them with the help of the stress gradient hypothesis, which is very um, helpful or very significant, which decreases competition and increases cooperation with those various species, which keeps diversity intact and also its production, productivity. So that would be all for me. Thank you, and the reporter will support this right after this video. Thank you so much.
Good day, everyone. I am Marilixel, and I am the next reporter in continuation to Mr. Soli's report under the relationship between production and diversity. The figure shows the relationship between nutrient availability, primary production, and species diversity. As the amount of nutrients increases, nutrients are not limiting anymore, and competition for light becomes the most important. And like variable underground competition, which takes place in the 3D space, and the competition for light takes place in 2D space, and the ways in which successful competitions apply are similar or greater height and larger left area. Unlike nutrients in the soil, which plants could easily share between themselves, light is thus easy to monopolize. Plants that are larger and taller with a larger leaf cover get most of the light, overshadow the other plants below them, and there is not much light left for them. Due to the fact that only a few species can monopolize light as a limiting source, only a smaller number of species will occur in nutrient-rich conditions, and the diversity of community is declining. Here, we would like to point to the fact that, as explained earlier, most of the natural ecosystems that are left today are less productive. Consequently, we know much less about the functioning of highly productive natural ecosystems than less productive ones. Moreover, many of the studies of plant response to nutrient availability were done on sites where nutrient availability was affected by anthropogenic influence, which means this anthropogenic influence is the human-made activity that causes damage to the ecosystems. On the other hand, as we have said, there is a possibility that we will examine the relationship between diversity and production by random selection of some species from the species pool found in a given landscape and growing them either alone or in mixtures with a different number of species. Such an experiment was tested in 2 classical experiments based on varying the number of species of grass communities in the USA and Germany. The results show that single species stands have on average less biomass than multi-species stands, and the biomass increases with increasing number of species. In overall, Freud suggests that production and diversity are closely intertwined and must be managed in balance to maintain a healthy ecosystem. He notes that by understanding the relationship between these two concepts, it is possible to achieve a balance between production and diversity in which can create a more sustainable ecosystem. And in his book Applied Ecology, John Peirce explores the relationship between production and diversity in a variety of ecosystems. He argues that production and diversity are inextricably linked in all ecosystems and that biodiversity is essential for the long-term sustainability of production.
Hi, I am Casida Geneva Maya Acosta and I am here to continue the discussion of Miss Marily Quisel. Frost explains that higher production levels typically result from higher levels of biodiversity. This is because different species can occupy different ecological niches and perform different functions, leading to increased efficiency and productivity. For example, a greater variety of plants can lead to higher yields of food crops as different species can use different resources and more resistance to pests and diseases. Similarly, a greater variety of animals can lead to higher yields of animal products such as meats or eggs. Mr. Frost is saying that when there is a higher level of biodiversity, which means more species of plants, animals, and other organisms in an ecosystem, it usually leads to higher levels of production. Production refers to the amount of goods or products that can be harvested or extracted from an ecosystem, such as food crops or animal products. As you can see in the picture that it is a high level of biodiversity. So has a bigger tendency that the species of plants, animals, and other organisms in an ecosystem can lead to or produce a higher production. The reason for this is that different species of plants and animals can occupy different ecological niches, which means they have specific roles or functions within the ecosystem. For example, is some plants may be better at using certain nutrients from the soil, while others may be better at tolerating drought or shade. Similarly, different animal species may have different diets or behaviors that allow them to utilize different resources with ecosystem. This increased diversity and specialization can lead to greater efficiency and productivity within the ecosystem. For instance, a greater variety of plants can lead to higher yields of food crops as different species can use different resources and are more resistant to pests and diseases. In other words, if one species is affected by a pest or disease, another species may be able to fill the gap and continue to produce food. The same principle applies to animal production as well. A greater variety of animals can lead to higher yields of animal products such as meat or eggs. Different species of animals may have different diets or provide different benefits, such as improved soil health or pest control, which can increase the overall productivity of the ecosystem. So that is all my report, and thank you.
At the same time, Froese also argues that production and diversity are mutually reinforcing. Increased production leads to more resources available to support a greater diversity of species, while greater species diversity can lead to increased production. This is because diverse species can interact in ways that increase production, such as through increased nutrient cycling or pollination. Means when there is a large production, many people and species can benefit to it as food and many more. On the other hand, Greater biodiversity in ecosystems, species, and individuals lead to greater stability. For example, species with high genetic diversity and many populations that are adapted to a wide variety of conditions are more likely to be able to weather disturbances, diseases, and climate change. Greater biodiversity also enriches us with more varieties of foods and medicines.
So, in summary of all the topic of the relationship between production and diversity is Frost argues that production and diversity are inextricably linked in all ecosystems, and with that, biodiversity is essential for the long-term sustainability of production. So we have um, we call this monoculture. So monocultures of randomly selected species have less biomass than polycultures, but monocultures of species that usually dominate can achieve the same or um, often higher biomass production compared to the polycultures, especially if these species are specially bred for this purpose and nutrients are not limiting rather. So however, if we do not supplement nutrients at low nutrient availability, species cooperation often increase productivity. So in such conditions, the advantages of the polycultures and the disadvantages of monocultures increase over time. So by constantly adjusting the um, conditions and supplementing nutrients, we can, however, maintain higher production of monocultures of selected species. So at the same time, increasing production by adding nutrients often leads to the decreasing in diversity.